All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Nobody Asked Me Guy show. Guys, we appreciate your return. We know that you are excited and that you are waiting to speak with and talk to Mr. Emory Shaw Campbell. But as always, you know, there are always some glitches when it comes to technology. However, we have a treat for you because Mr. Campbell will be back at a later date so that you can see that handsome face. However, he has been kind enough to talk to us via telephone tonight on this video cast that we normally do. And we know that you have a lot of questions, and we certainly will not bombard Mr. Campbell with a lot of questions. I want to briefly, if you guys would allow me, as we thank Mr. Campbell for joining us, we're going to introduce him officially here in a moment. But, you know, guys, before I do that, I want to give you a piece of information regarding Mr. Campbell. Now, why is that? Because as we talk all the time, we talk about history, we talk about Black history, we talk about how important our history is. But for some odd reason, we seem to just kind of pass over those individuals that are the true historians. So allow me, please. Now, first of all, we know that each and every one of you are going out and buy this book called Gullah Days. Okay? It's called Gullah Days, Hilton Head Islanders Before the Bridge, 1861 to 1956. Okay? Now listen, I want to just read to you a little bit about Mr. Campbell before we start speaking. Now, first of all, Mr. Emory Shaw Campbell is president of the Gullah Heritage Consulting Service, a Hilton Head Island-based firm. He manages the Gullah Heritage Trail tours as well as offers lectures and courses related to Gullah-Geechee culture. Before his current position, he was the executive director of the Penn Center on St. Helena Island, South Carolina, for 22 years. The center was established in 1862 as the first school for formerly enslaved citizens and is currently the leading repository of Gullah cultural heritage. Campbell was the valedictorian of the Michael C. Riley High School class of 1960. In 1965, he earned his undergraduate degree in biology at Savannah State College, now Savannah State University, and continued his studies in environmental engineering at Tufts University in Boston, Massachusetts, where he earned a Master's of Science degree in 1971. Now, Campbell serves as the first chairman of the Gullah-Geechee Culture Coordinator Commission established by the United States Congress in 2006 to preserve Gullah-Geechee cultural heritage. He has received numerous honors for his cultural and environmental preservation work, including an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree from Bank Street College, New York City, and the University of South Carolina, Beaufort. He resides on Hilton Hill Island in the neighborhood of his birth. Now, Mr. Campbell is a unique individual, and he's here with us on the phone. As I said, guys, he will be back so that you can see this handsome face of this brother. But as I said to our earlier audience, that we are having some camera challenges, and those things happen, as we all know, when we do social media. So at this time, guys, please allow me to welcome Mr. Emory Campbell. Mr. Campbell, good evening, sir.
Good evening. Should I talk into the phone?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Good evening. How are you?
Listen, I'm fine, Mr. Campbell, and I just want to thank you so very much for being kind enough to come on with us and to speak with us. Guys, I have to tell you this as I'm talking to Mr. Campbell. As I was sharing with Mr. Campbell, and we were trying to work out some time to possibly do a broadcast, he kept giving me assignments. And I told Mr. Campbell that I was so happy about those assignments because it actually prepared me to really understand some things that he's going to share with us this evening about the Gullah language, the Gullah-Geechee culture. And I had to laugh at myself because I expressed to Mr. Campbell, I said, Mr. Campbell, heck, I don't feel qualified to ask you any questions. I just want to hear about the Gullah and Gullah language. So he gave me some assignments, guys. So without further ado, Mr. Campbell, I just again want to thank you for coming on and sharing with us. And our audience comes to us across the country. We are live right now via Facebook. We are live via LinkedIn. We are live via Periscope. And we're also live via Twitter. So we literally have viewers from all over the country. And we just thank you for being with us. Now, I do not want to belabor your time with a lot of question answer period, cookie cutter things, etc. However, I would like us to begin, if you will, if you just share a little bit with us about Emory Campbell. You know, a lot of times people grow up and they leave their native area, but you chose to stay and to make this happen. So would you share with us a little bit about maybe what inspired you to remain at Hilton Head and to make this happen?
Well, Mel, I really didn't remain on Hilton Head. After graduating from Savannah State College with a degree in biology, I had to go and try to market my knowledge, and there were no place around here to market my knowledge in biology. That was 1965, when everything around here in South Carolina and the South were pretty discriminatory against black scientists. There was no way I could get a job here, so I went north. And I went north as a result of the Great Migration of the early 1900s. Had an aunt that left this area back in, oh boy, must have been 1920s. And from then on, we migrated into that area of Boston, New York, and that area. So after college, that's where I went and got a job working in microbiology. Did that for about 5 years before going back to grad school, and got a degree in environmental engineering. By that time, my good friend who helped to write this book had started a community health center, a rural health center that required environmental work. So he called me back home, and I got back home, worked at that for about 10 years, doing water and sewage throughout these sea islands where there were none. And so we installed potable water and sewage disposal systems into homes. And then the Penn Center called me. The Penn Center had been established as a school in 1862. Africans who had been enslaved and just been freed. And so that school became the center of education for many, many years. And of course, it closed down in about 1950s when we had the Board of Education. So we had to separate an equal system, and that Penn Center succumbed to that effort and closed as a school, but became a civil rights center where all of our civil rights workers could meet, because some of these groups were biracial, and in South Carolina you could not mix. In the South you could not mix races, so to speak. But Penn Center was kind of an oasis of integrated groups. And that place remained that for about, Martin Luther King and all the other civil rights workers would meet there. And after the civil rights movement, about 1975, the place became more dormant, and nothing was happening at Penn Center. But the alumni wanted to revive the place, and they asked whether or not I would take on directorship there. I went there with the idea that I would do about 3 years refurbish. In Penn Center, because it was still a well-known place to know about Gullah culture. And the Gullah culture was the essence of African culture, because over the years, these islands have been isolated enough for us to retain Africanisms, speech, spiritual life, foodways, craft, you name it, and you had a connection to Africa on these islands. Although we wanted to abandon it, because Gullah was a pejorative term, or Geechee, as some people know as Geechees. And so I stayed there and relearned my Gullah culture. After I retired, the same man, Tom Bonwell, said, why don't we write a book about Gullah cultural heritage? And by that time, these islands had become resort islands, connected by bridges and causeways. Mosquito control had gotten rid of the mosquitoes, and air conditioning had gotten rid of the heat. So now these islands are very populated, very popular. Golf courses everywhere. And unless we write this history, nobody will know that we've ever been here.
Wow. And as you share that about writing the history and getting the history out there, as we open the show, and I was sharing with our audience about the fact that so often we talk about history, Black history specifically, but we just kind of gloss over that. And that I was very intrigued and remain very intrigued with the Gullah language, even though I know none of it. The Gullah-Geechee examples that you talk about, and as you sent me on my assignments, and as you share that and you talk about the book and the history, as I was on one of those assignments that you sent me on, I was looking at a piece that talked about the Language and Life Project. Can you touch upon that a little bit?
The Language and Life
Project.
Well, the language was a mystique for many years. We used words like kuda for turtle and biddy for chicken and una for you, and then we would string those words with English, and the English words we also revised. We dropped the first syllables, and we don't pronounce the th. That's all African pronunciation of English words, and so nobody believed that we had retained African words until Lorenzo Turner in 1929, a Black linguist, came into the area, and he heard these people talking. He had gone to a college to teach during the summer, and he heard some people from Charleston area talking, some young people. That sounds like African I'm hearing. I hear African words. So he set out to try to record all the African words. He had an old tape recorder that weighed about 50 pounds. And he set out to go into the communities and go on the rivers where people were fishing and capture their language and interview them. 15 years later, he published the book, Africanisms in the Gullah Dialect.
Wow.
Africanisms in the Gullah Dialect. All of the other scholars of other persuasions condemn his work. There's no way these people could have retained, after 200 more years of slavery, could they have retained anything from Africa. He was the only one that had ever been to West Africa and heard Africans talk. And so he was the most qualified to compare the language patterns and the words. Eventually, some 50 years later, he is now the most revered linguist when it comes to the Gullah language by professors all over the country. And so the Gullah language was the key to our difference, to our retention of Africanisms. And yet it was the same language that was called Geechee. The way that we live was called Geechee and backward by everybody, not only other persuasion, but by our own people. And so nowadays, people are knowing that the residual of Africa and the African slave trade rests within the corridor, the Gullah-Geechee corridor that we call from Jacksonville, Florida, all the way up to Wilmington, North Carolina, from the ocean 20 miles in. And Congress in 2006 established that as the Gullah corridor.
Mm.
And we're trying to preserve those aspects of the Gullah culture, which are the Africanisms that you find.
Okay. Now, and as you share that, I'm listening because I've heard my great grandmother and quite honestly, some of the Black people where I was raised in Louisiana, it's called turtles, kudas, and that kind of thing, and and being young kids growing up and being exposed to quote American language, unquote. Man, we thought that was the funniest, most backward thing, to hear them say "cuda," call a Portuguese Gary, and that kind of thing.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, sir.
Yes, indeed.
And wow, and see, that's what I'm saying, Mr. Campbell. It's just intriguing because of all of the cultures that exist that I'm aware of, even in the 21st century in America. I mean, everybody seems to have some solid knowledge of their ancestry as it relates to language, as it relates to dress, etc., except most people that identify ourselves as African Americans.
Right. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. We had been made ashamed of it, and we had never known our history. But the other part of the Gullah culture is rice.
Okay.
When I grew up, they called me rice-eating Geechee.
Rice-eating Geechee. Okay.
because we ate rice every day.
Okay.
And we would eat it for every meal if it wasn't so expensive.
Mm-hmm.
There were 12 people in my family, so I had a large family.
Mm-hmm.
My father had 12 children. But the rice goes back to Africa as well.
Okay.
The colony of South Carolina grew more rice probably than any other colony. All this area that I talked about, Florida and Georgia and South Carolina, were rice-growing colonies. When the Civil War broke out in this area where I live now, they were producing 50 million pounds of rice a year.
50 million pounds.
Along with Sea Island cotton. That was the wealth of this area. This area was one of the wealthiest areas in the country. But rice, the slave trade in the early from 1600, late 1600 to the late 1700s, rice was the crop. And in a certain part of Africa, the Africans were growing rice 5,000 years before slavery started.
Wow.
They knew how to grow rice.
Wow.
And so rice-eating Geechee was a term that was derogatory at the time, but we have now found out how important we were to the rice plantations in South Carolina. Yeah.
Wow. And you referred several times to the Sea Islands. Can you help me a little bit with that? The Sea Islands, and I know you've talked about the language and the uses of your words, and now we're talking about the rice and the poundage and that type thing. What significance does the Sea Islands hold?
South Carolina Sea Islands were just before the Civil War were the wealthiest around because they were growing at that time Sea Island cotton, long fiber cotton that thrived on humidity and heat. It was an Egyptian species of cotton. Before then, rice grew more on the inland. They had rice plantations more on the inland. Getting near the coast, salt water and rice didn't get along well. So where I grew up here on Hilton Head, this is a sea island.
Okay.
They didn't grow much rice during slavery. They grew sea island cotton. The sea island stretches from just about north of Charleston all the way down to Georgia. You have the Fusky Island, you have Tybee Island, you have Johns Island, you have Hilton Head Island. All those little dots you can see on the map. Some of them are inland, just about inland. Most of them, many of them are on the shores against the Atlantic Ocean, which are called Barrier Island because the ocean comes to them first. So Hilton Head, where I grew up, is a barrier island. And when I grew up here, slavery had ended and the Union had confiscated all the plantations. And when I grew up, there were about 1,500 of us living on this island, all Gullah except for a few people. And the Union had confiscated the big plantations, sold it to the Northerners, who used it as a hunting preserve. So we had about 25,000 acres of an island here, of which we own about 5,000 of it. acres of it. And that was repeated throughout the Southeast, throughout South Carolina and Georgia. Nobody knew it because it was considered wasteland. Many of those islands you couldn't reach except by boat, and water gets so treacherous sometimes you couldn't get what we call a highlander to get in a boat to go over the water. And so we who were islanders, we didn't have any problem rowing boats and making bateaus, which we call the small wooden boats, into these waterways.
Huh. So as you talk about that, and I was going to ask this question, and you've tied it together for me somewhat already. I was wondering, what the connection was between the Gullah-Geechee people and the Sea Islands, and I know that there are many, but that's a very interesting piece that you're sharing, as far as it being non-navigable for some people that weren't accustomed to it. But you talk about the boats and that kind of thing. Were there other entities that were as important or more important than being able to navigate those waters and make those boats and make it useful, make the island more user friendly to the people that live there?
Well, nobody wanted to be on the coast before air conditioning and bridges and mosquito control. This was like wasteland after the Civil War.
Okay.
And so the population was sparse, and the people were poor.
Okay.
And we had to make a living. We had to live as if we were back home. We had to improvise, and back home meaning Africa. We improvised and we lived within that environment and made what we needed to make it. And nobody came to help.
Mm. Mm.
And so when the change came to these islands, it began again with Hilton Head, as it began with Hilton Head when the Civil War started. This is where the Union came when the Civil War started. After Charleston in April of 1861, Hilton Head was the next stop in November of that same year. But in some 50,000 troops here made this the center of the Union forces. And we got, to be free pretty early. Although we were considered contraband then, not having been emancipated until a year later. But this was the bulkhead. And before then, these islands were places that were run by Africans because of the malaria and the mosquitoes. And so the Africans could withstand that. And so during 8 months of the year, these islands were populated and plantations were operated by Africans. And so after the Civil War, Africans were left on these islands and along the coast. And so their life remained African.
Mm.
That's why we talk funny and like rice.
Okay.
That's the definition of a Gullah or Geechee person.
Okay. So, that is why they talk funny and like rice. Well, listen then.
When I grew up, if I went to the mainland and they heard me talk, they said, you sound like a rice-eating Geechee.
Okay.
And I thought rice was the reason why I talked that way.
You thought so.
Our folks don't know our history,
No, sir. No, sir.
So they hear something that they don't even understand.
Right. Right. Wow. So I guess, Mr. Campbell, we talk about, often there was talking black in America. So I guess that was, this is just an assumption, is when we hear possibly, back then, because I was a child in the early 50s and that kind of thing. And even now you hear, people talk about talking white and talking this and talking that. But But when you hear the term talking black in America, then you think that could have possibly attributed to the rice eating Geechee comment through our ignorance and that kind of thing, because even in Louisiana, I mean, I heard so many atrocious.
Some scholars have ventured out and said Black English, Gullah is the root of Black English.
Okay.
I mean, when you talk about Black English, they talk about the way we talk
Yeah.
Black people. And so Gullah is definitely a part of that, because we actually are heavily influenced by African language.
Right.
And also heavily influenced by the syntax of African language.
Okay.
And that's why we talk quote unquote black.
You gotcha. And see, this is a history lesson that needs to go worldwide, and especially now. And as I said when I spoke with you earlier, I know the missus is a former educator, and I know that you're doing your engineering thing as well, and me being an educator. And I tell you very honestly, I go on record as we talk to people across the world. I know nothing. I thought I knew some stuff.
I know some stuff.
Yes, sir. I thought I knew some stuff. I know nothing.
You know a lot.
Yeah.
This entire culture and the language has been so isolated over the years.
Yes, sir.
And we who were migrants, we Black people migrated north into the urban areas.
Yes, sir.
Wanted nothing to do with the rural areas, and nothing definitely to do with these islands.
Right. Okay.
And so, for the last 50 or 60 years, these islands have been repopulated by mostly Europeans.
Okay.
The Gullah people are still in New York, Philadelphia, Boston. They're trickling back now.
Okay.
And retiring near the golf courses, because some of those folks have become have pretty good retirement.
Okay.
But most of those folks are not Gullah folks who are coming back now.
Huh.
They don't have the Gullah roots. And so that's what's happened. We have migrated away from the culture, and we've tried to adopt the other culture.
Okay. So we spent a lot of time trying to assimilate as opposed.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go. We have assimilated. And just recently, over the last, when I was growing up, when I was a young man in my 20s in the civil rights movement, eventually by 1967, 68, we were talking about identity.
Mm-hmm.
I want my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a big afros.
Yes.
We had dashikis.
Yes. I still own some.
To look as black as we could. And so we began the movement then to recapture. But we still did not recognize that our culture was deeply embedded in the islands along the coast. Okay.
And I dabble in a little poetry, and I wrote a poem many years ago called "Being Black is More Than a Costume."
Okay.
And,
wow.
Yes, sir. And simply, quite honestly, I was inspired by the thought of what you're sharing with us right now. Is that being Black is more than a costume? We wore out, as you stated. Sir, I still have some dashikis right now. I wore the big afro and in the dark shades and that. But you know what, Mr. Campbell, I think I may have shared with you earlier. I've always been one opposed to the word militant, but I was always, quote, under that umbrella. But I'm always opposed to it, because why would I have to be labeled a militant? Because I refuse to be ashamed of who I am, and I refuse to accept that your way is the way of the world.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Right. Yeah. We've eventually, I think at this stage in the country, we're beginning to embrace diversity. And differences, and therefore the Gullah culture has been embraced now by many, and we have no other choice because we have not changed along the coast there.
Yes, sir.
We still hear the Gullah language. We still like our food ways. And the interesting thing is the people who are now moving on to the coast are looking for differences.
Okay.
They want Gullah food.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we don't have enough restaurants to accommodate them.
Okay. Well, listen, as you share that, there's a little four-letter word that even as a boy I've always felt good about, but I never saw much of, and that's legacy. As we talk about the Gullah language, Gullah-Geechee language, people kind of matriculating back to the islands and that kind of thing. Do you find, and I don't, this may be an unfair question, I don't know, it's a loaded question, but do you find that even those that may have gone away and stayed permanently, that are now drifting back, have any sense of the legacy, although we tried to get away from it initially? Do you think they have any sense at all of the legacy that was actually set?
We operate a tour now we've been doing it for 24 years. I don't know where the time went. We started a tour business here, my family that is, in 1996. And every day we take about 30 to 40 people around the island and explain the culture. And our black fairs, black people who get on the tour are very, very interested in their legacy.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know. And sometimes a few of them will get on the tour bus, and halfway through the tour they begin to own up to who they are.
Huh.
Yeah. So, oh yes, I remember my grandmother said such and such word, or we ate such and such food. Oh yes, we understand. I remember that folklore, that folk tale. And so yeah, people definitely are recalling their legacy.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It's even in this 21st century, Mr. Campbell, it's and please allow me to say, because this interview is not about me, but it's just, even to this day I get what word am I looking for? I get mentally exhausted because I still see so many of us in the 21st century see how far we've come, but how far we have to go, and we try to pretend that everything is just all right, everything's okay, that we don't have a legacy, and we need to do the best we can to assimilate to what's put before us. And we have to deny our legacy to embrace what's put before us. And I just have very serious trepidations with that.
Yes, that's why we have, when we sent the publisher some photographs, they selected the one on the front of this book.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Yes, sir.
They happen to be my grandparents.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, this right here. Yes.
Yeah. And they were deeply Gullah.
Okay. Yes.
My grandmother spoke fluent Gullah.
Okay.
My grandfather practiced net knitting, the same kind that you had in Africa, where you can knit nets and catch fish and shrimp and everything else.
Okay.
Yeah, he really was a true Gullah man.
Okay.
Believed in spirituality of African descent. I mean, of African.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So yeah, we tend to wanna assimilate, but there's certain things about black people that they just can't get rid of. The taste buds are there, right. The spiritual belief is there,
right?
And so we might as well, own up to who we are.
Yes,
and learn more about ourselves.
Yes, yes. Again, I often challenge, especially the young people that I educate and have the privilege to be around. And I keep asking them, and I'm very serious about. I'm 66 years old, and I keep asking them over and over and over. Is if you are so set on becoming someone else, why is everybody trying to imitate us?
Oh gosh, you have done so much to contribute to this country's culture.
Yes, sir.
Foodways, music, art forms. I mean, you have nothing. Black people have nothing to be ashamed of.
Nothing.
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 Absolutely nothing.
No, sir. But it's amazing though how gullible we are. Also, one have, you know what, and also again, in my poetry exploits, I wrote a poem, Mr. Campbell, called "The Infamous Watermelon."
The what?
The infamous watermelon.
All right. Okay.
And if I could share with you briefly, just because of what you're saying, I wrote that poem because I said to people. I said, having dabbled in professional football for a minute, I was privileged to go into restaurants that I could not afford ever to go in had I not been in and going to these fancy restaurants, etc. I said, and having had the ability through education to travel and go in some of the best restaurants they have available, why is it that I always see watermelon in the fruit area?
All right.
I said, we don't frequent there enough for them to, so who's eating it? I said, and then when I see, and I say, there's certainly not enough of us for farmers to produce the number of watermelons that they produce. So who's eating it?
Uh-huh.
And I would use that many times to try to educate our people and our kids when we allow people to try to embarrass us about things that we do, our culture, things that take place. So that's why I was sharing with you is that, and I promise you I wasn't going to talk you to death tonight because I know we'll be back and talk about the book specifically. If you don't mind, like, we can talk about it a little bit tonight too. But that's why I'm saying with you, I'm just intrigued because as I started reading Gullah Days and as I started reading in Before the Bridge, etc., and I saw I could place myself mentally in some of those areas as I would see the movement of the people and many times even though free but still oppressed and all of that kind of thing. Sure. And I feel very strongly that all exposed to the islands.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Watermelon was a big crop right after slavery among black people. And the reason for that is we knew how to grow it. It was handed down from Africa all the way through slavery. And that's the one thing that we knew how to grow. And it became a very lucrative crop around the sea islands among Gullah people.
Okay.
Right after the Civil War. And oh gosh, Savannah is about 18 miles by water from this island. Mm-hmm. And just as an example, they would load down bateaus and sail it to Savannah. Sail bateaus with a little wooden boat about 30 feet long. Okay. Flat bottom. Our folks made them. And then it would sail down the river. Sometimes it took them as many as 2 days. Whoa. There's a story in this book where my uncle said he went to Savannah with a boatload of watermelon. Okay. And a man met him on the shoreline and offered him $900 for his boatload of watermelon. Okay. I mean, he's talking 1930s. Wow. I mean, that would make you grow. That would make you go back and grow some more. Yes, sir. and the Tuskegee University and places like that used to actually send out people to teach them how to grow these different crops and different species of watermelon. Yes, sir. And somehow we were made to be ashamed of it so that somebody else could take the market. There you go. There you go. There you go. And we give it up. There you go. And we got ashamed of eating watermelons and all that because somebody else wanted to damage our market.
There you go.
Oh yeah, watermelon, and it's now become known as one of the healthiest fruits.
Yes, sir. Most certainly. And that in and of itself is for me a watermark in time, because people looking like me have allowed ourselves to be embarrassed about who we are and our purpose and our movement.
Yeah, you cannot abandon your culture.
Absolutely. May I please, and I want to keep you all the night. May I just ask you, if you don't mind, just kind of touch on the first chapter, a little bit of the book. I was noticing, and I'll ask specifically. Well, I say the first chapter, not necessarily the first chapter, but I was noticing on the closing of the book here, when it talks about the Gullah culture born of African roots, isolation and slavery has thrived on the U.S. East Coast Sea Island since pre-Civil War times, especially on Hilton Head, South Carolina. And the specific question I want to ask, I know you shared with us earlier that they had come in and pretty much control the mosquitoes and the snakes, etc. Is there an ongoing what am I looking for? Environmental protection to ensure that since the islands now have become such tourist attractions, to make sure these things remain in place? Is that employment for the original Gullah people, or has that employment been taken over by the developers, or just what's happening in that arena?
Yes, along the coast, you've got quite a bit of displacement going on, and of course, migration out of this area into the Northeast. We had some abandonment of land that were lost, and they're still being lost. And now we've got the offers being made to the younger generation.
Yes, sir.
For these parcels of land that were acquired, 3, 4, 5 generations ago by their foreparents. I always said that, at one time, for first 3 or 4 generations, we knew how to use the land to produce income and food and residential places. Today, and we use the old crop to do that: watermelon, sweet potatoes, okra, beans, all African crops. The new crop is condos, timeshares. We have not learned how to grow those crops. We have not learned because nobody has taught us. And I often said that Booker T had it right when he said, put down your bucket where you are, meaning that you should, just develop your own community, develop your land. In those days, develop your land meaning, know the different crops to grow.
Right.
Put your residence on it. Today, it means you got to grow that other crop. We get 2.5 million tourists to come to Hilton Head. You don't have a place for anybody to stay.
Okay.
We have maybe one restaurant. And so we got to teach. We got to have a different method of teaching. And the teaching is going to have to be, how do I now make this land work for me, although I don't have as much as I had before?
Okay. Very interesting. Very interesting. On one of the and last question. One of the assignments when you sent me back, I found some video of this gentleman Adolph Brown, and as you talk about put your bucket down, he was talking about real estate development and some of the Gullah people themselves cashing in on the real estate and that kind of thing, which is what you're sharing with me now. I know that a lot of us like to stay with our original thoughts. Do you find it? And the reason I mentioned this gentleman's name is because I saw him on this video as I was doing some study on the Gullah country, and I let me back up just for a minute. I understood the growth conversation, but I also, unfortunately, I sensed through his conversation, his what word am I looking for? His disrespect, I thought, somewhat, for the ancestors and for those that had worked so hard to even make it be a place where you had history and tradition. So I guess my question is, gentlemen like Adolph Brown, and I don't, as I said, I just knew him from doing some study. What kind of message do you feel, and you may not even want to answer this question, that he may be sending? Because even though he talks about real estate development, but the way in which and it's just my rendition, the way in which he put it, as an outsider, I almost received it as him putting down the traditionalist who wanted to preserve some of the traditions and to keep some of the legacy that is known for the islands.
But some of these situations are so complicated because of the fact that these are family-owned property that was left. And of course, we, as I said earlier, we don't have the knowledge of turning those properties into income-producing ventures.
Right.
Sometimes some families have good intentions, and then they get to these roadblocks that they have to make other decisions.
Right.
And that's the root of a lot of these problems, just the roadblocks that you run into.
Right. Okay. I just kind of wondered about that as I, again, being an outsider and looking at this information. Well, I want to be a man of my word. You have certainly brought a lot. I mean, thumbs are going up everywhere on my other monitors, and hearts are going up, and that kind of thing. And you've certainly brought a lot of credence to our show. People are applauding and sending up clapping hand signs, etc. And what I'd like to ask while we have you on air is, will you be amenable sometime in the near future and we come back and discuss the book specifically? I mean, obviously we want people to buy the book, but I mean some highlights maybe that we can discuss in the book. Obviously, we don't want to give the book away, but we can talk about the book a little bit more and possibly.
I'd be glad to.
Okay, sounds great. Sounds great. We appreciate that, and I want our audience to know again is that the book is called Gullah Days, Hilton Head Islanders, Before the Bridge, 1861-1965. And the book does have three authors. It has Mr. Thomas C. Barnwell Jr., Carolyn Grant, and Emory Shaw Campbell. It says with Christina Bledsoe. So we want you guys, first of all, we want you to commit to go and support Black business. And I hope, Mr. Campbell, allow me to say this to them, is that we want them to support Black business. Not only do you need to find out about our history, but you need to support Black business.
Thank you. Amen. Absolutely.
Okay. So, Mr. Campbell, if our guests wanted to contact you individually, would you like to share with them a mode of contact?
Well, we have a tour business that you should come and take this tour. We had Gullah-Geechee, Gullah Heritage Trail Tours. Online is a website. You can book online if you come into Hilton Head, or you can call us on that number that's on the website, Gullah-Heritage.com.
Okay.
Gullah Heritage with one H, GULLAHERITAGE.com.
Gullah-Heritage.com with one H, guys. Okay, guys, listen, we thank you so very much, Mr. Campbell. Guys, listen, you know how we roll here. You know, everything is positive. We're going to talk about life as a whole. We want you to come back on next week. We have some dynamic guests lined up for you. And again, this is the Nobody Asked Me Guys show. I'm Melvin Lars. And as always, we always share with you, read, and read. The latest book I penned is called Mothers and Their Smen. an introspective look at mothers rearing their sons. We know there's a lot of conversation out there about that right now, mothers rearing boys. So we was laid on our spirit to kind of write a book about that. You can get it from Barnes and Noble, or you can just check my website, www.dyingonmyfeet.com. So again, guys, thank you so very much for being here with us on the Nobody Asked Me Guy show. And we look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same station. Mr. Campbell, thank you so very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Love.
We look forward to the return, and we will be letting our audience know when you will be returning.
Thank you, sir. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Have a great night, sir.
You too. Bye now.